Friends, there is a great amount of trouble swirling around us in our lives. Wars and violence, corruption and greed. I hear from many of you that you are struggling. With all that is going on, it is healthy, physically and spiritually healthy, to step back from it all, to find a time to just be, to breathe. I asked you all a few months back to find your center, to build an altar, to get grounded. One simple and profound way is simply to breathe with intention, to be still for a moment and breathe. I am reminded of one of my favorite meditations by a colleague from a previous generation named Jacob Trapp, who offers a lyrical ode to quiet stillness. Let this house be quiet, he writes. Let our minds be quiet. Let the quietness of the hills, the quietness of deep waters be also in us. So quiet that the noise of passing events and present anxieties, of random recollections and wandering thoughts, is stilled. So quiet that we are renewed, we feel at one with all others, and I just love this line, at home in a tabernacle of stillness. So quiet that we sense the ripples of this pool of quietness and healing pass through us and out to the farthest star. Do you have times of healing stillness in your life? The advice from Psalm 46 comes to mind. Be still and know. It's really a song about the protection God offers. God is our refuge and strength, it begins, a very present help in trouble. The psalm goes on to say that we need not fear because even though the mountains may shake and the waters roar, even if the very earth should change, God is our refuge and strength. If nations are in turmoil, it says, and kingdoms seem about to fall, we need not fear. And near the end of the psalm, we hear the line, sung as a quote directly from God, "Be still and know that I am God." We can almost imagine what it's like during times of great turmoil or natural disaster. There's panic. People are in danger from an earthquake, a hurricane, political upheaval is certainly mentioned in the psalm. Perhaps we are feeling powerless or hopeless. Be still and know that I am God. When faced with trouble, the first thing to do, according to the psalm, is to do nothing, to slow down, to look for God. Many people take this advice when danger is less than an actual earthquake and more of a metaphorical earthquake, if you will. It's often good when turmoil is around us to take a beat, to stop, or at least pause. Allow your prefrontal cortex to catch up to what your amygdala has already suggested for solutions to the situation. It's sound advice. I read once that the reason a long pause like this works scientifically is because your amygdala triggers your limbic system, causing that fight or flight response. But while the amygdala turns on like a switch, it does not turn off like a switch. Instead, we need to wait for the neurochemicals to dissipate. So scientifically speaking, being still and knowing God is an effective technique for dealing with situations like this. Being still and knowing God allows us to make choices instead of having a reaction. It allows us to choose a response rather than to have a thoughtless reflex. Now, in our Unitarian Universalist circles, I suspect more of us nod in recognition about the amygdala Then we nod in agreement about the word God. Allow me a moment on this point. We Unitarian Universalists function as a multi-faith community. We gather around shared values, such as love, justice, and transformation, instead of gathering around shared beliefs about God or the human condition. I encourage us to be fluent in theological translation together. If you believe in God, and use that language when talking about your belief and your spirituality, you may need to translate. Most Sundays when I'm preaching, I will say the holy, or love, or talk about our communal values that call us to be in the world in a particular way. And when you hear me do that, you may need to stop and say to yourself, oh, he's talking about God. If you're a pagan, and you hear me talking about caring for the environment or the beauty of nature, you may need to stop yourself and say, oh, he's talking about the goddess. Or if you're an atheist and you hear me talking about God's love or quoting from the Bible, you may need to stop and say to yourself, oh, he's talking about the high principles and deep values that guide our living. Or if you're a Buddhist and you hear me say, be still and know that I am God, you may need to stop and say to yourself, oh, he's talking about our Buddha nature, which we uncover through meditation and Dharma study. I encourage us all to become fluent in theological translation here, because we each have our own way of knowing and understanding. We each have experiences that have led us to see the world in certain ways and to help us find meaning. What does it look like in this exact example? Be still and know that I am God? Well, the Buddhists, as I already mentioned, have a deep understanding of what can be known when we are willing to be still. For pagans, it may sound less like being still and more like going through the rituals and the practices to reach that place the psalmist is pointing toward. For atheists, the translation may sound like, be still and allow inner clarity to arise. Or be still and recognize that what really matters in life is more important than reacting. The important part is to tap into your centering values, your spiritual ground, the loving presence of God. That aspect of life that helps you displace ego and set you into alignment with love. You don't need to have a particular theology to have access to that experience. Be still, the psalmist sings, and know that I am God. This advice is sound. It's good to stop and refocus when things are hard. And after the stillness, after the knowing, what's next? It's worth noting that stillness is abnormal. When we are willing to be still, we're doing something unusual, unnatural even. Reverend David Bumbaugh once wrote, silence is an abnormal state. The same point applies to stillness, but hear what he says about silence. Silence is an abnormal state. The world is nowhere silent. The wind calls from the treetops and whispers into the beach grass. Were our ears more finely attuned, we would hear the cracking of granite as boulders are reduced to pebbles, pebbles to sand, and sand to dust. The world is nowhere silent. Birds sing and chirp, squirrels chatter, insects hum and whir. They fall quiet only briefly at our approach, a suggestion that silence is a sign of fear. Is it not strange that as Gaia sings to us, calls to us, shouts at us, we seek wisdom in silence? Is it not a measure of our alienation that we retreat into silence, withdraw from the chorus, in order to hear the eternal, endless song? We are silent, Bumbaugh suggests, as a form of withdrawal from the ordinary way of things. And so it is with stillness, too. Nothing is ever really still. We seek stillness as a temporary state to find clarity. not because we want to achieve stillness for stillness' sake. The Buddha recognized that Chandra did not need to learn to be still to find a way through to what was actually the point. Painter Paul Gardner once said, "A painting is never finished, it simply stops in interesting places." And the same could be said of all life, of nearly everything. It's never finished, it simply stops in interesting places. The whole existence is dynamic and changing. Mount Everest, that huge mountain standing as a perfect symbol of massive, unyielding, constant, solid reality, is growing about 2 millimeters per year as the continental plate under India pushes against the Asian plate to the north. Meanwhile, sea levels around New York City are rising faster than in other places because the island isn't finished sinking into the Earth's crust after the glacial ice melt of the last ice age. Nothing is still. The whole universe is alive and pulsing with sound and movement. Life is always changing, and it is to life that we must stay true. Everything is in motion. Be still, God says. I can't. My heart is beating. My atoms are whirling. My planet is spinning. I cannot be still. But I will pause briefly, O God. I will pause and listen for what might be next. Author Scott Russell Sanders writes a little bit about this in a book of essays entitled Earthworks. Since Copernicus, he writes, we have known better than to see the Earth as the center of the universe. Since Einstein, we have learned that there is no center, or alternatively, that any point is as good as any other for observing the world. I take this to be roughly what medieval theologians meant when they defined God as a circle whose circumference is nowhere and whose center is everywhere. If you stay put, your place may become a holy center, not because it gives you special access to the divine, but because in your stillness you hear what might be heard anywhere. All there is to see can be seen from anywhere in the universe if you know how to look. It's all the same time, Jen reminded us in our poem this morning. The point of being still is to better learn to listen, to look, to know life. Don't be still thinking that if you can only be still enough for long enough, you will somehow win. The universe doesn't work that way. God doesn't work that way. Be still and know, yes. And after the stillness, after the knowing, be not still. All the world is in motion. There are wars and violence happening around the world and in our own streets. There is trouble clamoring for our attention. When anger or impatience arises in your heart, when your neighbor or your kin causes you want to lash out, when the mountains shake and the waters roar, when nations are in turmoil, when you feel lost or hopeless, unmoored, be still. Be still. Be still. Say a prayer. Go walk in nature. Write in your journal. Perform a ritual. Sit in meditation. Gaze upon a beloved. Light a candle. Seek God. Be still. And know. Know that you are loved. Know that you have power still to affect your days. Know that you are precious. Know that you are not in this alone. Know that we can rise. We will rise to better days. Know God. Be still and know. And then, rise up and move. in a world without end. May it be so. Let us join in singing our closing hymn.